Tonight, we begin with a story of Catherine the Great, a German princess who reshaped herself into Russia's most formidable and fascinating empress. Her life was a tapestry woven with sharp intellect, boundless ambition, scandalous romances, and sweeping reforms. She overthrew her own husband in a daring coup, yet filled her court with the ideas of Enlightenment thinkers. She ruled with an iron will, yet dreamed of justice and progress. It's a story that defies simple labels, part political thriller, part intellectual awakening, and all human. Take a quiet moment, if you'd like, to settle in. If you've enjoyed what you've heard so far, consider liking the video or subscribing, but only if it truly resonates with you. And if you feel like sharing, let us know where you're listening from and what time it is in your corner of the world. Sometimes these stories pull us in deeper than expected, but don't worry. We're still working on those truly boring ones, just as promised. For now, perhaps dim the lights, turn on a fan for that gentle hum in the background, and let's walk through tonight's tale together. She was born Sophie Friederich Auguste von Anhalt-Zerbst on May 2nd, 1729, in a quiet corner of the Holy Roman Empire. Her family belonged to the minor German nobility, not poor, but far from powerful. They lived in modest comfort, sustained more by connections than by grand estates or influence. Her father was a Prussian army officer, dutiful but unremarkable. Her mother, however, was sharp-tongued and fiercely ambitious, determined to lift their status through a well-placed marriage. Even as a young girl, Sophie sensed this quiet hunger in the air, and in time, she would learn to wield it with masterful precision. She wasn't born with destiny etched into her name. No one in the German courts whispered that she would one day rule an empire. Yet there was something different about her. She was unusually poised for her age, deeply curious, and possessed an almost restless intellect. Languages came easily to her. She devoured books with a quiet intensity, and she watched the behavior of courtiers with the focus of a hawk. Her world was small, the chilly halls of Zerbst, but her mind roamed far beyond its walls, already imagining lives and places she had never seen. Then, at just 14 years old, everything changed. Empress Elizabeth of Russia, who had no children of her own, had chosen her nephew, Peter of Holstein-Gottorp, as her successor. But Peter needed a bride, one who could be shaped to Russian tastes and loyalties. Sophie, with her noble but unthreatening background, was selected. Overnight, her life tilted on its axis. Russia wasn't just another kingdom. It was a vast, mysterious empire of snow orthodoxy and absolute power. And it was about to become her home. The journey east was long and bitter. When she arrived, she was a foreigner, speaking little Russian, raised in the Lutheran faith, and bearing a name that belonged to another life. But Sophie didn't hesitate. She converted to Russian orthodoxy, taking the name Catherine Alexeyevna. She studied Russian relentlessly, practicing until her accent disappeared and her fluency surpassed even that of her future husband, Peter. She reshaped herself entirely, shedding every trace of resistance, every hint of foreignness, until she seemed to belong. Her mother thought her too serious. Courtiers found her too quiet. But Catherine was watching, especially Peter. She saw in him not a future emperor, but a boy playing at greatness, obsessed with toy soldiers, indifferent to diplomacy and emotionally distant. In that cold clarity, she made her first quiet vow. If Peter could inherit a throne, she could take one. The royal wedding was grand in appearance, politically necessary. But for Catherine, it marked the beginning of a long, lonely winter. Peter was no prince from a fairy tale. He was awkward, immature, and emotionally stunted, more interested in drilling miniature armies than in matters of state or heart. Catherine, meanwhile, perfected the art of quiet endurance. She smiled when expected, dressed with grace, and observed everything, especially the mistakes she would never make. She quickly realized that survival in the Russian court wouldn't come from her marriage, but from her mind. So she turned inward, building a private world of ideas. She read voraciously, hiding books beneath her pillows and staying awake through the night. She studied Montesquieu, Rousseau, and Voltaire. She filled journals with thoughts on justice, governance, and human dignity. Slowly, in the silence of her room, she began shaping a vision of what a ruler could be, not a tyrant, but force for reason, reform, and enlightenment. Yet the court was a nest of vipers. Spies lurked in corridors. Alliances dissolved by sunrise. Even her health became a weapon others used against her. Rumors swirled that Peter denied her medicine during a near-fatal illness. She survived, but never forgot. So she began gathering her own circle. Trusted nobles, key military figures, even her personal physician. She learned the weight of every word. When to speak, when to stay silent, and when to whisper just loudly enough to be heard by the right ears. When her marriage turned irreparably cold, she sought warmth elsewhere. Lovers entered her life discreetly, not out of recklessness, but strategy. They brought affection, yes, but also protection, loyalty, and influence. Yet love was never her compass. Power was. Peter remained the heir, but Catherine was no longer willing to live in his shadow. She had tasted ambition. She had read forbidden books. She had learned how to survive, and now how to rise. When Empress Elizabeth died in 1762, Peter III ascended the throne. Catherine, now in her early 30s, had spent more than a decade in patient preparation. But Peter's reign was a disaster from the start. Within months, he alienated nearly everyone. The Orthodox Church, the nobility, and most dangerously, the military. He pulled Russian troops from a successful war against Prussia, Frederick the Great's homeland, despite Russia's losses. He mocked Russian customs, dress and Pruss, in uniforms, and showed open contempt for the very people he was meant to lead. Catherine watched it all with quiet precision. By then, she had already built her network of loyalists. Among them was Grigory Orlov, a dashing officer of the Imperial Guard, and her lover. But Orlov was more than a romantic companion. He was her bridge to the soldiers who held real power. Behind closed doors, Catherine laid her plans. She made promises. She secured oaths. She had no legal right to the throne, but she had something far more valuable, the trust of those who carried swords. On the morning of June 28, 1762, while Peter was distracted at his summer palace, Catherine made her move. She rode to the barracks of the Izmailovsky regiment, stood before the soldiers, and declared herself sovereign of Russia. They pledged their loyalty instantly. One by one, the regiments, the nobles, even the clergy fell in line. She rode to the streets of St. Petersburg in full imperial regalia, calm, composed, and utterly in command. The people didn't resist. They cheered. Peter fled in panic. Within days, he was forced to abdicate. Soon after, he was dead, murdered under circumstances that remain murky to this day, though almost certainly with the involvement of Catherine's allies. She never admitted to ordering his death. She never denied that it served her. When asked about it, she simply said he was no longer needed. It had been a nearly bloodless coup. No riots, no civil war, just a swift surgical transfer of power. A foreign-born woman, once a pawn in someone else's game, had seized control of one of the world's largest empires. She had done the unthinkable. But claiming the throne was only the beginning. Now came the harder task, proving she deserved it. Catherine understood something rare among rulers of her time. That power wasn't just about armies or ancestry. It was about image, about narrative. So, once crowned, she reinvented herself once more, not as a usurper, but as a philosopher queen. She corresponded with Voltaire, Diderot, and other leading minds of Europe. To them, she wasn't merely a monarch. She was living proof that Enlightenment ideals could take root in even the most autocratic soil. She welcomed thinkers to her court, funded scholars, and spoke publicly of liberty, reason, and education, all while ruling with absolute authority. Yet ideals often clashed with reality. Russia remained a deeply feudal society. Millions lived in serfdom, bound to the land and to noble masters. Catherine dreamed of reform, a fairer legal code, better schools, a cleaner bureaucracy. In 1767, she convened a legislative commission to draft a new legal framework. She personally wrote the nakaz, or instruction, a bold document inspired by Enlightenment thought that condemned torture, championed education, and called for equality before the law. European intellectuals praised it as revolutionary. At home, it foundered. The nobility refused to surrender their privileges. The church resisted secular reforms. And Catherine, ever pragmatic, chose not to force the issue. She shelved many of her boldest plans, but never abandoned the image of herself as a reformer. Still, real progress did take hold. She expanded education, especially for girls, founding the Smolny Institute for Noble Maidens, the first state-funded school for women in Russia. She invested heavily in the arts, opening theaters, libraries, and museums. Under her reign, St. Petersburg blossomed into a cultural capital worthy of Europe's finest cities. She ruled not just with strength, but with vision, building an empire not only of land and armies, but of ideas. St. Petersburg blossomed under her care, becoming a beacon of culture and elegance. Catherine wasn't imposing Enlightenment ideals by decree. She was drawing people toward them, making reason and beauty irresistible. She hosted salons, commissioned grand architecture, and filled the city with music, art, and intellectual energy. In her vision, Russia wouldn't just mimic Europe, it would rival it. But this vision required balance, a delicate, almost daily negotiation. She had to keep the nobility loyal, the peasantry subdued, and European thinkers convinced of her sincerity. She walked a tightrope between progress and control, between the language of liberty and the realities of ruling an empire built on hierarchy and force. Publicly, she spoke of justice and reason. Privately, every decision was weighed for its political cost. Her brilliance lay in making idealism look like strategy, and strategy look like destiny. Yet for all her discipline and intellect, Catherine could never escape the world's fascination with her private life. In the gilded corridors of the Russian court, where rumor moved faster than truth, her romantic relationships became the stuff of legend. Her first great love after the coup was Grigory Orlov, the daring officer whose loyalty and military influence had helped place her on the throne. He was more than a lover. He was her partner in revolution. Together, they had altered the course of Russian history. But as time passed, Orlov grew unpredictable. Catherine, ever pragmatic, began to look beyond him. What followed wasn't a series of reckless indulgences, but a string of carefully chosen relationships. Her lovers were rarely chosen for charm alone. They were often men of intellect, administrative skill, or military prowess. Figures who could strengthen her rule as much as warm her bed. Among them, one stood apart, Grigory Potemkin. Potemkin was unlike any court favorite before him. He was brilliant, fiery, and fiercely ambitious. Their romance burned with rare intensity, and though it eventually shifted from passion to partnership, their bond endured for the rest of their lives. Potemkin didn't just share Catherine's bed. He helped shape her empire. He masterminded the annexation of Crimea, spearheaded military campaigns, and crafted Russia's foreign policy with bold vision. Some even whispered they'd secretly married, a claim never proven, but supported by the depth of their correspondence. Their letters were warm, witty, and deeply personal, filled with affection and mutual respect that transcended romance. He in uniforms and showed open contempt for the very people he was meant to lead. Catherine watched it all with quiet precision. By then, she had already built her network of loyalists. Among them was Grigory Orlov, a dashing officer of the Imperial Guard, and her lover. But Orlov was more than a romantic companion. He was her bridge to the soldiers who held real power. Behind closed doors, Catherine laid her plans. She made promises. She secured oaths. She had no legal right to the throne, but she had something far more valuable, the trust of those who carried swords. On the morning of June 28, 1762, while Peter was distracted at his summer palace, Catherine made her move. She rode to the barracks of the Izmailovsky regiment, stood before the soldiers, and declared herself sovereign of Russia. They pledged their loyalty instantly. One by one, the regiments, the nobles, even the clergy fell in line. She rode to the streets of St. Petersburg in full imperial regalia, calm, composed, and utterly in command. The people didn't resist. They cheered. Peter fled in panic. Within days, he was forced to abdicate. Soon after, he was dead, murdered under circumstances that remain murky to this day, though almost certainly with the involvement of Catherine's allies. She never admitted to ordering his death. She never denied that it served her. When asked about it, she simply said he was no longer needed. It had been a nearly bloodless coup. No riots, no civil war, just a swift surgical transfer of power. A foreign-born woman, once a pawn in someone else's game, had seized control of one of the world's largest empires. She had done the unthinkable. But claiming the throne was only the beginning. Now came the harder task, proving she deserved it. Catherine understood something rare among rulers of her time. That power wasn't just about armies or ancestry. It was about image, about narrative. So, once crowned, she reinvented herself once more, not as a usurper, but as a philosopher queen. She corresponded with Voltaire, Diderot, and other leading minds of Europe. To them, she wasn't merely a monarch. She was living proof that Enlightenment ideals could take root in even the most autocratic soil. She welcomed thinkers to her court, funded scholars, and spoke publicly of liberty, reason, and education, all while ruling with absolute authority. Yet ideals often clash with reality. Russia remained a deeply feudal society. Millions lived in serfdom, bound to the land and to noble masters. Catherine dreamed of reform, a fairer legal code, better schools, a cleaner bureaucracy. In 1767, she convened a legislative commission to draft a new legal framework. She personally wrote the nakaz, or instruction, a bold document inspired by Enlightenment thought that condemned torture, championed education, and called for equality before the law. European intellectuals praised it as revolutionary. At home, it foundered. The nobility refused to surrender their privileges. The church resisted secular reforms. And Catherine, ever pragmatic, chose not to force the issue. She shelved many of her boldest plans, but never abandoned the image of herself as a reformer. Still, real progress did take hold. She expanded education, especially for girls, founding the Smolny Institute for Noble Maidens, the first state-funded school for women in Russia. She invested heavily in the arts, opening theaters, libraries, and museums. Under her reign, St. Petersburg blossomed into a cultural capital worthy of Europe's finest cities. She ruled not just with strength, but with vision, building an empire not only of land and armies, but of ideas. St. Petersburg blossomed under her care, becoming a beacon of culture and elegance. Catherine wasn't imposing Enlightenment ideals by decree. She was drawing people toward them, making reason and beauty irresistible. She hosted salons, commissioned grand architecture, and filled the city with music, art, and intellectual energy. In her vision, Russia wouldn't just mimic Europe, it would rival it. But this vision required balance, a delicate, almost daily negotiation. She had to keep the nobility loyal, the peasantry subdued, and European thinkers convinced of her sincerity. She walked a tightrope between progress and control, between the language of liberty and the realities of ruling an empire built on hierarchy and force. Publicly, she spoke of justice and reason. Privately, every decision was weighed for its political cost. Her brilliance lay in making idealism look like strategy, and strategy look like destiny. Yet for all her discipline and intellect, Catherine could never escape the world's fascination with her private life. In the gilded corridors of the Russian court, where rumor moved faster than truth, her romantic relationships became the stuff of legend. Her first great love after the coup was Grigory Orlov, the daring officer whose loyalty and military influence had helped place her on the throne. He was more than a lover. He was her partner in revolution. Together, they had altered the course of Russian history. But as time passed, Orlov grew unpredictable. Catherine, ever pragmatic, began to look beyond him. What followed wasn't a series of reckless indulgences, but a string of carefully chosen relationships. Her lovers were rarely chosen for charm alone. They were often men of intellect, administrative skill, or military prowess. Figures who could strengthen her rule as much as warm her bed. Among them, one stood apart, Grigory Potemkin. Potemkin was unlike any court favorite before him. He was brilliant, fiery, and fiercely ambitious. Their romance burned with rare intensity, and though it eventually shifted from passion to partnership, their bond endured for the rest of their lives. Potemkin didn't just share Catherine's bed. He helped shape her empire. He masterminded the annexation of Crimea, spearheaded military campaigns, and crafted Russia's foreign policy with bold vision. Some even whispered they'd secretly married, a claim never proven, but supported by the depth of their correspondence. Their letters were warm, witty, and deeply personal, filled with affection and mutual respect that transcended romance. But the court, and indeed all of Europe, couldn't look away from the spectacle of a powerful woman who loved openly. Foreign ambassadors filed breathless dispatches about her favorites. Pamphlets circulated across the continent, painting her as immoral, debauched, even monstrous. One particularly vile and entirely fabricated rumor claimed she died during an encounter with horse, an absurd lie rooted in nothing but misogyny and fear. It was meant to humiliate her, to reduce a sovereign to a caricature. Catherine never dignified these slanders with a response. She didn't need to. Her reign spoke for itself. She held the Russian throne against staggering odds. She expanded its borders, modernized its institutions, and governed with unmatched efficiency. Yes, she loved with intensity, but never without calculation. To her, affection was another theater of power, where loyalty could be deepened, alliances forged, and influence extended. Her heart was never careless. It was strategic. Catherine often spoke of liberty, justice, and the light of reason, but behind the silk gowns and intellectual salons was a ruler who understood the cold mechanics of power. And in 1773, that understanding was put to its severest test. A man named Emelian Pugachev, a Cossack and former soldier, rose up in the east, claiming to be Peter III, Catherine's long-dead husband. He denounced her as a usurper and promised freedom to the peasants and serfs. His message found fertile ground in a countryside choked by poverty and resentment. The rebellion spread like wildfire, becoming the largest peasant uprising in Russian history. Catherine was shaken, but not paralyzed. She responded with swift, unrelenting force. Imperial troops marched into rebel-held villages. Leaders were captured, tortured, and hanged in public as warnings. Pugachev himself was dragged to Moscow in a cage, then executed in a gruesome display meant to terrify any future challengers. With his death, Catherine sent a message as clear as it was brutal. The throne would not be questioned. The rebellion marked a turning point. The empress, who once dreamed of humane laws and enlightened governance, now ruled with hardened realism. She had glimpsed the chaos beneath the surface of her empire, the desperation, the inequality, the rage, and it frightened her. Instead of addressing those wounds with sweeping reform, she strengthened the very structures that had created them. Serfdom deepened under her reign. Noble privileges were reinforced. The rural poor sank further into bondage. Stability, she decided, required siding with the aristocracy, the class that ensured her survival. And so a contradiction took root in her rule. To Europe, she remained the enlightened monarch, a patron of the arts, a correspondent of philosophers, a symbol of progressive monarchy. But at home, she governed with an increasingly imperial hand. The woman who once drafted a visionary legal code now issued decrees that preserved the old order. Perhaps that was her genius. She understood that to hold power in a volatile world, one sometimes had to betray the very ideals that brought one to power in the first place. She wore Enlightenment philosophy like a crown, but beneath it was iron. If Catherine ruled with vision, she expanded her empire with precision. She didn't just defend Russia's borders, she reimagined them. Her ambition was not merely territorial, but civilizational. She wanted Russia not just to exist, but to dominate, to be a center of culture, trade, and geopolitical influence. Her gaze turned first to the south, to the Black Sea and the weakening Ottoman Empire. Control of Crimea meant access to warm water ports, new trade routes, and strategic dominance in the region. The wars were long and bloody, but under the guidance of Potemkin and her generals, Russia pressed forward. By 1783, Crimea was annexed. Russia now stood as a Black Sea power, its navy sailing where once it had only dreamed. Then she turned west to Poland. Fractured by internal divisions and weakened by centuries of political decay, Poland became her next opportunity. Catherine positioned herself as a guardian of order, while quietly orchestrating its dismemberment. In 3 calculated moves, the partitions of Poland, she joined forces with Austria and Prussia to carve up the kingdom. By 1795, Poland had vanished from a map as an independent state. Its eastern lands now belonged to Russia. It was diplomacy of the coldest kind, efficient, ruthless, and devastatingly effective. Under Catherine's rule, the Russian Empire grew by more than 200,000 square miles. Millions of new subjects, Ukrainians, Belarusians, Lithuanians, Tatars, Jews, were folded into her realm. Russia had never been larger nor more diverse, but expansion brought its own burdens. Governing these new territories was complex. Some resisted Russian rule. Others demanded autonomy. The empire grew heavier, harder to hold together. Catherine responded with administrative reforms, reorganizing provinces, founding schools, and standardizing governance. It was a race against unrest, a constant effort to bind a sprawling empire into a coherent whole. Through it all, she maintained her image. She framed each conquest not as aggression, but as the spread of civilization. In letters to European leaders, she portrayed herself as an enlightened ruler bringing order and progress, not swallowing nations. To her allies, she was a brilliant stateswoman. To her enemies, a predator in silk. But to history, she became something rarer, a conqueror who expanded an empire not through blind aggression, but through strategic patience, diplomatic finesse, and unwavering resolve. As Catherine aged, her mind remained as sharp as ever, though her body began to slow. She continued to read dispatches, draft policies, and preside over court well into her 60s. But the world around her was shifting beneath her feet. In 1789, revolution erupted in France. Kings fell, crowds stormed palaces. Liberty and equality became battle cries. For Catherine, who had once embraced Enlightenment thinkers as kindred spirits, the French Revolution was a nightmare. The very ideas she had once championed now threatened to consume monarchies across Europe. She banned revolutionary texts. Censorship tightened. Her court, once a haven for bold ideas, grew cautious and insular. The Enlightenment, it seemed, had an expiration date, especially when it turned against the throne. In her final years, she became more isolated, surrounded by advisors, yet increasingly alone in her vision. The fire of youth had mellowed into the steady glow of experience, but the weight of ruling never lifted. She remained until the end both philosopher and empress, dreamer and realist, lover and sovereign, a woman who reshaped an empire, not by accident, but by will. The love of her life, Potemkin, died in 1791. Though their romance had long since evolved into a deep political partnership, his passing struck Catherine with a quiet, private grief. She continued to surround herself with younger favorites, men who were charming, loyal, and attentive, but none possessed a strategic brilliance or shared vision that had defined her bond with Potemkin. They were companions, not collaborators. And then there was her son, Paul. Catherine had never trusted him. She saw in him none of her clarity, none of her steadiness. He was moody, impulsive, and drawn to rigid, autocratic ideals that clashed with a more measured, pragmatic style of rule. Privately, she even considered bypassing him entirely in the line of succession, quietly grooming her grandson Alexander as the next Tsar. It was a daring plan, one that might have reshaped Russia's future, but time ran out before she could set it in motion. In November 1796, Catherine suffered a massive stroke. She never regained consciousness. She died a few days later, alone in her chambers, with unfinished reforms still scattered across her desk and unspoken reflections filling the pages of her private journals. When Paul finally ascended the throne, one of his first acts was to dismantle much of his mother's legacy. He buried her not among her chosen allies or in a monument of her own design, but in the Peter and Paul Cathedral, right beside Peter III, the husband she had overthrown, the man whose death had cleared her path to power. In death, they were laid side by side in stone, though they had never truly shared a life. The Russian court mourned, the country paused, and Europe watched as one of its most captivating monarchs slipped into history. Catherine the Great had reigned for 34 years. She left behind a Russia that was larger, wealthier, and more influential than ever before, and a legacy that continues to stir debate even today. Her final chapter was written not with fanfare, but in silence. After all, Catherine was never meant to rule. She wasn't Russian by birth. She wasn't born to a throne. She was a minor German princess from an unremarkable family, plucked from obscurity and dropped into a world that expected her to fade into the background. Instead, through sheer intellect, political mastery, and unrelenting will, she seized control of an empire and held it for more than 3 decades. Her legacy is rich with contradictions. She spoke the language of the Enlightenment, writing passionately about justice, reason, and reform. She corresponded with Voltaire, hosted philosophers, and dreamed of humane laws in a land where cruelty was routine. Yet when those ideals threatened her authority, she set them aside. She dreamed of abolishing serfdom, but ended up expanding it. She championed equality in letters while ruling as an absolute monarch. And yet, her impact is undeniable. She modernized Russia's bureaucracy, making the state more efficient, centralized, and capable. She founded schools and hospitals, supported the arts, and transformed St. Petersburg into a glittering capital of European culture. Under her leadership, Russia didn't just grow in size. It grew in confidence, influence, and global standing. She ruled in a man's world and outmaneuvered them all. Her court buzzed with powerful advisors, brilliant minds, and passionate lovers. But make no mistake, Catherine was always in control. Every alliance, every policy, every carefully written letter served a greater vision. She turned a swampy outpost into a cultural beacon. She stretched Russia's borders farther than anyone imagined possible. She left behind libraries, academies, palaces, and institutions that bore her name long after she was gone. But perhaps her greatest legacy isn't measured in territory or laws. It's in possibility. Catherine proved that a woman, born with no claim, no army, no divine right, could rise through intelligence, charisma, and sheer force of will to become one of history's most consequential rulers. She didn't shatter expectations with rebellion. She redefined them with grace, calculation, and relentless ambition. To some, she remains a symbol of tyranny. To others, a patron of reason. But to history, she is something even more compelling, a real, complex, brilliant human being, flawed, determined, and fiercely alive, who ruled not by accident, but by design. Catherine the Great didn't just wear the crown. She rewrote the very idea of what a ruler, any ruler, could be. Long before it was a city, El Dorado was a man, or rather, a ritual. Among the Muisca people, what is now central Colombia, there lived a chieftain who, during his coronation, would cover himself head to toe in fine gold dust. He would then step onto a raft, floating in the center of a sacred lake, surrounded by priests and nobles. As the sun rose, he would cast emeralds, golden trinkets, and other precious offerings into the water, a sacrifice to gods, a ceremony of renewal, a moment of profound spiritual meaning. The Muisca called him El Hombre Dorado, the Golden Man. But when Spanish conquistadors arrived in the early 1500s, they heard only fragments of the story. They misunderstood, or perhaps chose to reinterpret, what they were told. To them, El Dorado wasn't a ritual. It wasn't a man. It was a place. A hidden kingdom, gleaming with unimaginable treasure, nestled deep in the mountains or lost in the jungle, untouched by time, war, or decay. In the European imagination, the legend mutated rapidly. The Golden Man became a golden city. The city became a kingdom. The kingdom swelled into an entire empire, rich beyond measure, peaceful, perfect. El Dorado no longer meant the Gilded One. It meant paradise, salvation, a dream for men who were far from home, half-starved, and desperate for glory. The jungles of South America soon hummed with rumor. Somewhere in that endless green maze, a city of gold waited. Indigenous people, wary of their violent visitors, sometimes spoke vaguely of distant lands or mysterious rivers, perhaps to appease, perhaps to mislead. But the conquistadors heard only clues. Every whisper became a map, every story a promise. El Dorado was no longer just a myth. It became a fever. Around campfires, in letters sent back to Seville and Madrid, the legend grew grander with each telling. Soldiers who had never left Spain dreamed of it. Poets gave it wings. Kings poured fortunes into expeditions to find it. And soon, it didn't matter whether El Dorado existed at all. What mattered was that men believed it could. And in the age of conquest, belief was enough to move armies. This golden illusion would drive some to greatness, others to ruin. It became one of the most enduring legends of exploration, a mirage of wealth always just out of reach, always deeper in the jungle, always beyond the next ridge. El Dorado was no longer a story. It was a compass pointing to nowhere, and still they followed. In 1541, a brutal expedition set out from Quito, led by Gonzalo Pizarro, brother Francisco Pizarro, the conqueror of the Inca Empire. Gonzalo had heard tales of cinnamon forests, rivers lined with gold, and a fabled city called El Dorado hidden just beyond the Andes. Determined to claim it, he assembled over 300 Spanish soldiers, hundreds of indigenous porters, dozens of horses, and a dream woven from desperation and greed. But the jungle was no dream. It was a living nightmare. Rain fell for days without end. Rivers swelled and swallowed their supplies. Insects feasted on exposed skin. Men collapsed from hunger, disease, and exhaustion. As weeks stretched into months, the expedition began to unravel. Food vanished. Morale shattered. Many porters died or fled. The Spaniards, weighed down by armor useless against the elements, grew weak, paranoid, and desperate. In a final gamble, Gonzalo ordered a smaller group to push ahead in search of food and a path forward. That detachment was led by Francisco de Orellana, a lesser-known nobleman who would soon carve his name into history. Not by finding gold, but by accident, Orellana and his men floated down a great river, following its winding current deeper into unknown lands. Days turned into weeks. Returning upstream became impossible. There was only one way left, forward. With a handful of men and a makeshift brigantine, Orellana sailed down what would later be named the Amazon River. He passed through vast, seemingly endless forests and encountered indigenous societies far more complex than Europeans had imagined. He later claimed to have seen grand settlements, organized kingdoms, and even tribes of warrior women, tales that would fuel the El Dorado myth for generations. Eventually, he reached the Atlantic Ocean. He became the first European to navigate the entire length of the Amazon. But he found no gold, no city, no El Dorado, only a continent vaster and more mysterious than anyone had believed. Back in the Andes, Gonzalo Pizarro's main force had all but vanished. The few survivors dragged themselves back to Quito, starving, broken, their dream in ashes. But the myth had already taken root. The jungle had claimed its first real blood in the name of El Dorado, and the legend was only beginning. By the mid-1500s, Spanish obsession had narrowed to a single, haunting location, Lake Guatavita. Nestled in the Emerald Highlands of present-day Colombia, this nearly perfect circular crater lake shimmered with an otherworldly beauty. But it wasn't the scenery that drew the conquistadors. It was a story. The Muisca people had long performed sacred rituals there, and one ceremony in particular had captured European imaginations. The very same tale of the golden chief on the raft, casting treasures into the water. Now, the Spaniards believed the lake itself was filled with centuries of sunken gold. El Dorado, they decided, wasn't out there in the jungle, but right here, beneath the surface of this quiet, sacred water. A chieftain, naked and shimmering with gold dust, would glide across the lake's still surface on a raft, surrounded by priests and attendants. As part of the sacred ceremony, he would cast emeralds, golden figurines, and other precious offerings into deep, blue water, gifts to the gods, not treasures for men. To the Muisca, it was an act of devotion, renewal, and cosmic balance. But to the Spanish, it was proof of something else entirely. They didn't see a ritual, they saw a vault, and they were determined to crack it open. In 1536, Conquistador Gonzalo Jimenez de Quesada arrived at the lake's edge. His men scooped a few golden trinkets from the shallows, just enough to ignite a lasting obsession. Over the following decades, wave after wave of treasure hunters came, each convinced untold riches lay at the bottom of Lake Guatavita. The most audacious attempt came in 1580, led by Antonio de Sepulveda, a wealthy entrepreneur who believed draining the lake was the only way to claim its bounty. He conscripted indigenous laborers and carved a massive trench into the mountainside, hoping to channel the water away. As the lake level dropped, mud and silt gave way to fragments of gold, But before the lake could be fully emptied, the crater walls collapsed, burying hopes and workers alike. Though a handful of artifacts were recovered, the fabled hoard remained hidden beneath centuries of sediment and silence. Yet that failed attempt only deepened the legend. Lake Guatavita was no longer just a setting for myth. It became its very heart, a place where gold had been offered for generations, where secrets slept beneath the water, and where hope refused to drown. Even centuries later, modern adventurers arrived with sonar, scuba gear, and dynamite, convinced they could succeed where others had failed. But the lake held firm. It gave up only echoes, enough to keep the dream alive, never enough to fulfill it. By the late 16th century, the fever for El Dorado had spread far beyond Spain. The English, hungry to challenge Iberian dominance and carve their own empire, now turned their eyes toward the rumored Golden City. And no one was more captivated by the dream than Sir Walter Raleigh. Charismatic, ambitious, and a favorite of Queen Elizabeth I, Raleigh was a man of both poetry and steel. He saw in El Dorado not just wealth, but legacy, a chance to eclipse the Spanish conquistadors and crown himself a hero of the age. In 1595, he sailed to Guyana, the dense rainforest region near the Orinoco River in present-day Venezuela. Armed with second-hand accounts, captive testimonies, and boundless confidence, he plunged into the jungle. The journey was punishing. Sweltering heat, tangled undergrowth, and rivers that shifted without warning. But Raleigh returned with something even more valuable than gold, a story. He claimed to have glimpsed the edges of a vast, golden empire ruled by a powerful king just beyond reach. His published account, the discovery of the large, rich, and beautiful empire Guyana, was filled with evocative descriptions, suggestive maps, and just enough mystery to dazzle readers. There was no hard proof, but his words shimmered with such conviction that England believed him. Queen Elizabeth was intrigued. The public was spellbound. Raleigh became a legend, but time turned against him. Elizabeth died. Raleigh fell from grace, imprisoned in the Tower of London by King James I. Yet El Dorado still burned in his mind like a fever. In 1617, after more than a decade in captivity, he persuaded the king to grant him one last expedition, to finally prove his claim. This time, everything unraveled. His men attacked a Spanish outpost, breaking the fragile peace between the crowns. In the skirmish, Raleigh's beloved son, was killed. Heartbroken and empty-handed, Raleigh returned to England. King James, furious over the diplomatic disaster and the pointless loss of life, ordered his execution. In 1618, Raleigh was beheaded in public. His dreams severed along with his head. He had chased a city that likely never existed, and in doing so, became El Dorado's most tragic believer. And still, the myth lived on. As centuries passed, the legend only grew stronger with each failed quest. The Amazon rainforest, vast, humid, and unforgiving, became both canvas and executioner. Men from Portugal, Germany, the Netherlands, and beyond poured into its green depths, armed with compasses, Bibles, muskets, and dreams. Few returned whole. The jungle needed no traps. It simply waited. Canopies blotted out the sun. Rivers changed course overnight. Poisonous creatures hid in plain sight. Starvation, disease, and despair claimed most. Those who pressed deeper met the fierce resistance of indigenous peoples who knew their land intimately and defended it with precision. Again and again, the pattern repeated. A new expedition, grand promises, weeks of grueling travel, and then silence. Many vanished without a trace. El Dorado had ceased to be a single place. It became whatever each seeker needed it to be, a city in the Andes, a hidden valley, a lake-bottom kingdom, a cave of golden idols. Its shape shifted with every fevered hope, and that was its true danger. The jungle didn't need to guard gold. It only needed to let men follow their own illusions until exhaustion, madness, or violence consumed them. Some survivors returned babbling of strange lights in the distance, of distant chants in the night, of glimpses of golden objects through the trees. Half starved and half delirious, their minds wove hallucinations into testimony. El Dorado had become a psychological labyrinth, a paradise promised in exchange for everything: reason, loyalty, life itself. For centuries, historians dismissed the legend as pure fantasy, a product of greed, cultural misunderstanding, and European arrogance. But in recent decades, something remarkable has emerged. Archaeologists exploring the Amazon have uncovered growing evidence of complex, sophisticated societies that once flourished in regions long assumed to be empty wilderness. Using LiDAR technology and ground surveys, researchers in Brazil, Bolivia, and Peru have revealed vast networks of roads, earthen mounds, fortified settlements, and intricate agricultural systems, now buried beneath centuries of jungle growth. Even the soil tells a story. In scattered pockets across the Amazon, scientists have found terra preta, dark earth, a nutrient-rich, human-made soil enriched with charcoal, bone, and organic waste. This wasn't natural. It was engineered by ancient peoples who transformed poor rainforest soil into fertile farmland, sustaining large, stable populations long before European contact. Could be that early explorers like Orellana weren't lying or exaggerating, but witnessing the final days of civilizations already collapsing under the invisible tide of European diseases, that their reports of great cities were based on real, thriving cultures, ones that vanished before they could be understood. Today, scholars increasingly believe that El Dorado was never a single city of gold, but a distorted reflection of many real ones. The legend wasn't born from nothing. It was stitched together from fragments, misunderstood rituals, glimpses of advanced societies, and the glitter of ceremonial gold. The Muisca's golden chief became a golden kingdom. A sacred lake became a treasure trove. A continent's complexity was flattened into a fairy tale for conquerors. So perhaps El Dorado was never a place on a map. Perhaps it was always a memory, a dream built from truth, warped by longing and polished by centuries of obsession. And as the myth spread across Europe, it didn't just live in stories or songs. It was etched boldly, confidently, onto the maps of the age, where it waited, shimmering, for the next believer to follow. From the 16th through the 18th centuries, cartographers, armed more with rumor than with compass or measurement, began filling the blank spaces of South America with invention. The unknown was terrifying, yes, but it was also a canvas, and nothing painted that canvas more vividly than gold. Across aging parchment maps, the name El Dorado appeared in bold, elegant script, pinned to lakes, rivers, and mountain ranges that never existed. Sometimes the city was placed near Lake Guatavita. Other times it floated deep in the Amazon basin, or nestled behind the mythical Orinoco highlands. Some maps depicted entire golden empires, complete with sun temples, domed palaces, and fantastical beasts guarding the approach. These maps weren't crafted to deceive. Not exactly. They were made to sell. Each one was a siren's song aimed at monarchs with deep coffers, merchants hungry for new markets, and mercenaries eager for glory. They sparked funding, justified territorial claims, and gave explorers something just plausible enough to chase. The lack of proof wasn't a flaw. It was the very feature that made the myth so magnetic. The more uncertain the location, the more room imagination had to bloom. And so the legend grew, not just in tavern tales or royal correspondence, but in geography itself. These maps found their way into palaces, libraries, and private collections. They were copied, embellished, and passed hand to hand by dreamers convinced that riches waited just beyond the edge of the known world. With every reproduction, the myth gained detail, certainty, and allure. But these beautiful fictions had real, often tragic consequences. Expeditions were launched based on rivers that flowed only on paper. Men died following curves of ink that bore no relation to earth or water. Whole regions were claimed, colonized, and reshaped because a mapmaker in Seville or Amsterdam had scribbled a kingdom into existence. Even after El Dorado was widely discredited, the maps kept circulating. Why? Because humans cling to hope long after reason lets go. A map is more than a tool. It's a promise. And these promises glittered with the weight of destiny. Even today, collectors prize these antique charts, not for their accuracy, but for what they reveal, a time when belief outweighed evidence, when a dream drawn in ink could move armies and empty treasuries. El Dorado never needed to be real. It only needed to be drawn. Centuries have passed. The jungle has reclaimed the bones, the rusted swords, the silent footprint of those who chase a golden mirage. And yet, the myth endures. It lives in books, films, museum displays, and bedtime stories. It's Indiana Jones racing through ruins. It's the road to El Dorado lighting up childhood imaginations. It's become a symbol, not of a place, but of an impulse, the human hunger for more. Even into the 19th and 20th centuries, the dream pulled new explorers southward, now armed with compasses, rifles, and scientific curiosity. Alexander von Humboldt, one of the greatest naturalists of his age, journeyed through South America in the early 1800s. Though skeptical of golden cities, he couldn't ignore the whispers of lost civilizations hidden in the green. Later came Percy Fawcett, the British explorer obsessed with a mythical Amazonian metropolis he called Z, a clear echo of El Dorado. In 1925, he vanished into the jungle with his son, never to be seen again. Some say he was killed. Others whisper he found something and chose never to return. Even now, in the 21st century, the search continues, not for gold, but for truth. Using satellite imagery, drones, and LiDAR, archaeologists are uncovering vast networks of ancient settlements beneath the Amazon canopy. Roads, plazas, agricultural systems that suggest thriving societies once flourished where Europeans claimed only wilderness existed. No golden city has surfaced, but something far more profound has, evidence that the myth may have been rooted in reality, however distorted. And still, El Dorado gleams, not in the earth, but in the mind, because we never truly needed proof. What we needed was a pursuit, the quiet conviction that somewhere out there lies a secret that changes everything, that if we go far enough, risk enough, endure enough, we might just find it. El Dorado is no longer a place on a map. It's a metaphor for ambition, for obsession, for the eternal human reach beyond the horizon. We chase it in careers, in love, in art, in the quiet dreams we nurse at 3 a.m. It doesn't matter if it exists. What matters is that we keep walking toward it. In the end, El Dorado was never found. No gilded walls, no emerald thrones. The jungle never parted its leaves to reveal paradise. And yet, its legacy outlived the empires that sought it. Because what the explorers failed to understand, and what we're only now beginning to grasp, is that the real treasure was never gold. It was what the journey revealed. Rivers no map had charted. Peoples whose knowledge of the forest surpassed any European academy. Languages, medicines, and ways of living that reshaped our understanding of civilization itself. Men like Orellana didn't discover El Dorado, but they opened a path into the heart of the world's greatest rainforest. Others lost everything: wealth, sanity, life. But their names endure, not for what they found, but for what they were willing to risk. El Dorado endures because it speaks to something deep within us. The belief that there's always more to uncover, more to become, more just beyond the next ridge. We see it in every entrepreneur chasing a vision, every artist refining a masterpiece, every traveler seeking a place untouched by time. They are all, in their own way, following a golden city that may not exist, but that shapes their choices nonetheless. The myth isn't failure. It's a mirror. It shows us our highest aspirations and our deepest flaws, our curiosity, our courage, and yes, our greed. It reminds us how far we'll go for something beautiful, something meaningful, something that whispers in the quiet, just a little further. El Dorado is not a lost city. It's a question, and each generation answers it in their own way. So the next time you hear a story too good be true, ask yourself, is it a lie or a dream worth chasing? Because sometimes the real El Dorado isn't a place at all. It's the journey itself. Now, let us turn to a different kind of dream, one not of gold, but of glory offered to the gods. The origins of the Olympic Games were never about medals or world records. They were about reverence. In the year 776 BCE, deep in the heart of ancient Greece, people began to gather, not to wage war, not to barter goods, but to worship. They came to Olympia, a sacred sanctuary nestled in the green folds of the Peloponnese Peninsula. There was no grand city here, only olive groves, quiet altars, and marble statues of gods watching over the land. The purpose was singular: to honor Zeus, king of the Olympian deities, through ritual, sacrifice, and the pure physical excellence of mortal men. The games were born not in a stadium, but at an altar, an ancient mound of ash built from centuries of burnt offerings. Before a single foot race began, Before a discus spun to the summer air, oxen were led to sacrifice. Incense rose in spirals. Hymns echoed through the trees. The first Olympics were, at their core, an act of devotion. Only free-born Greek men were allowed to compete. No women, no slaves, no foreigners. They arrived representing their polis, their city-states, Athens with its philosophers, Sparta with its warriors, Corinth with its merchants, Argos with its ancient pride. Each athlete carried more than his own ambition. He bore the hopes of his homeland on his bare shoulders. There were no grandstands, no roaring crowds, no global broadcasts. Yet the air hummed with something sacred. For a few days every 4 years, rivalries paused. Dialects softened. Politics quieted. At Olympia, Greeks remembered they were, beneath their differences, one people, bound by language, myth, and the gaze of the gods. From every corner of the Hellenic world, they came, bronzed by sun, hardened by travel, many walking for weeks just to stand on that hallowed ground. To compete wasn't vanity, it was holiness. It was a way of touching the divine, of testing the human body as the gods had designed it. Strong, disciplined, and unashamed. There were no gold medals, no trophies of silver or bronze, only a wreath of wild olive, cut from a sacred tree near Zeus's temple. But that wreath carried more honor than any treasure. No king had decreed these games. No empire had imposed them. They rose from something deeper, woven into the very soul of Greek identity. The belief that to strive with all one's might, in body and spirit, was to honor the gods themselves. Here, in the shadow of marble temples and beneath the ever-watchful eyes of Zeus, the Olympic Games drew their first breath, not as sport in the modern sense, but as sacred ritual. In a land where city-states were often locked in bitter rivalry or outright war, it was nothing short of astonishing that every 4 years, the Greeks found a reason to lay down their arms. That reason was divine, Zeus himself. Before each Games, heralds were dispatched from Elis, the region that oversaw Olympia, to proclaim the Ekakyria, the sacred truce. This was no mere suggestion. It was a solemn, binding covenant across the entire Greek world. For 1 month, sometimes extended to 3, warfare was to cease. No armies could march. No swords could be drawn. Even hostile borders were open, allowing athletes, priests, and spectators safe passage to Olympia. The truce didn't promise lasting peace between Athens and Sparta or end centuries of political tension, but it demanded something deeper, respect for the gods above human conflict. In theory, it ensured that even bitter enemies could compete side by side. In practice, it was a quiet marvel of ancient diplomacy. City-states that had clashed on blood-soaked battlefields one season stood shoulder to shoulder on the dusty track the next. Even Sparta, fiercely proud, rigidly martial, honored the truce for much of the game's early history. To violate it was to risk not only the wrath of rival cities, but to disfavor the gods themselves. At Olympia, a towering bronze statue of Zeus loomed, thunderbolt in hand, a silent, awe-inspiring reminder that divine law governed this ground. But the truce was more than a safety measure. It was an act of unity. Greece was not a nation, but a patchwork of fiercely independent polis, each jealous of its autonomy. Yet through the Ekakyria, they gathered in one place, for one purpose, bound not by politics, but by shared reverence. It was symbolic. Even in a world ruled by war, there could be islands of order, respect, and ritual. For a few sacred days, Greek identity rose above division, and as the olive wreaths were prepared and the athletes readied themselves, they did so under a peace not enforced by soldiers, but commanded by the gods. At Olympia, there were no uniforms, no tunics, no armor. The athletes competed fully and deliberately nude. To modern sensibilities, this might seem startling, but to the ancient Greeks, the naked body was not a source of shame. It was a celebration. Strength, symmetry, and discipline were not just physical traits. They were outward signs of inner virtue, the soul made visible. Competing naked wasn't optional. It was essential to the ritual. The Greek word gymnos means naked. From it came gymnasium, the training ground, the place where young men shaped both body and mind. Athletes anointed themselves in olive oil, not for vanity, but to highlight the contours of their form and reduce friction during movement. Dust was often sprinkled over the oil to prevent slipping and to accentuate muscle definition. In the sacred arena, the human body became living art. Nudity also carried profound meaning. It erased distinctions of wealth and status. In the arena, a prince and a farmer stood as equals. Clothing stripped away, only effort, discipline, and physical mastery remained. The body itself became a uniform, excellence, the only rank. This exposure carried a moral dimension, too. For the Greeks, shame lay not in nudity, but in cowardice, deceit, or weakness. To step onto track or into the wrestling pit unclothed was to declare, "I have nothing to hide." It was an act of honesty, placing oneself before the gods and the community in complete vulnerability and truth. Sculptures from the era reflect this reverence. Chiseled runners mid-stride, discus throwers coiled in motion, wrestlers locked in silent struggle. These weren't mere decorations. They were ideals carved in stone, models of the heroic spirit for generations to emulate. Even the gods, Apollo, Heracles, were depicted in this heroic nudity, their divinity expressed through perfect form. Women, however, were excluded not just from competing, but from attending. Only unmarried girls might watch from a distance, and even that was rare. The Olympic space was wholly male, sacred, exposed, and fiercely competitive. In this context, nudity wasn't indecent. It was divine. The athlete stood as a living offering, a body trained, tested, and transformed, not for personal glory alone, but for the favor of Zeus. There were no second chances at the ancient Olympics, no silver or bronze. The Greeks believed excellence was singular. Victory was absolute. In every event, only one man could win. His reward? A simple wreath of wild olive leaves, asterisk Cotinos asterisk, cut from a sacred tree near Zeus's temple. It held no monetary value. It didn't gleam. It couldn't be sold or stored. Yet it meant everything. This wreath was a gift from the gods, a symbol of immortal glory. To win at Olympia was to have your name etched into history. You return home not just as a champion, but as a hero. Your city might erect your statue at the sanctuary. Poets would compose odes in your honor. Some victors received lifetime privileges, free meals, front row seats at festivals, even public office. But the true prize wasn't material. It was Eurydice, the Greek ideal of virtue, excellence, and fulfillment of one's highest potential. For the athlete, Eurydice meant winning, nothing less. The stakes were immense because the games were never just personal. Each man represented his polis. A victory reflected not only his strength, but the honor and vitality of his entire people. Defeat, then, was more than personal failure. It was a blow to communal pride. There were no consolations, no participation medals. The line between eternal fame and total obscurity could be measured in a single heartbeat, a stumble, a moment's hesitation. Those who lost often slipped quietly back into anonymity. But the victor? He stood apart, crowned in silence, his olive wreath catching the sunlight, forever touched by the divine. The very first games in 776 BCE featured just one event. The stadion, a foot race of about 192 meters, the length of the stadium itself. No starting blocks, no shoes, no false start rules. Just bare feet on packed earth. 2 markers at either end, and a breathless hush before the judges gave the signal. Then dust, speed, and silence broken only by pounding feet. The first recorded Olympic champion was a cook named Coroebus of Elis, a humble man, unknown beyond his kitchen, until the day he ran faster than any other. His prize? Not gold, not land, not power, just an olive wreath and a name that would echo through millennia. Over time, the games grew. By the 7th century BCE, new events were added. The Dialos, a double stadium sprint. The Dolichos, a grueling long-distance race. Wrestling, discus, javelin, and a long jump, all woven into the pentathlon. A test of total physical mastery. To win it, you had to be fast, strong, agile, and sharp-minded. Then came the pancration, a brutal fusion of wrestling and boxing with almost no rules. Biting and eye gouging were forbidden, but everything else was permitted. Men left the arena bloodied, bones broken, sometimes dead. But if you emerged victorious, you were more than a champion. You were a legend, and perhaps most spectacular of all were the chariot races. In the hippodrome, teams of horses thundered around the track, hooves kicking up clouds of dust, wheels splintering, drivers and animals crashing in chaotic tumbles. These races were dangerous, unpredictable, and wildly popular, a spectacle of speed, power, and mortal daring. Through it all, the spirit remained unchanged. This was not mere entertainment. It was worship. Every sprint, every throw, every drop of sweat offered not for fame alone, but to the gods, under open sky, in sacred peace. They weren't driven by the athletes themselves, but by hired charioteers, professional drivers who risked life and limb for their owners. Yet it was the owner of the horses, not the man who guided them through the dust and danger, who received the olive crown. Status mattered. Wealth could buy victory, even if it couldn't buy the sweat or the scars. But in 776 BC, none of that existed yet. There was only that first foot race, the stadion, one event, one victor, one quiet beginning. And yet from that single sprint, a movement was born. One that celebrated the human body as a vessel of the divine, that pushed physical limits not for spectacle, but for sacred purpose. Sport became more than play. It became ritual. It became honor. As the centuries passed and new events were added, the grueling races, the punishing pancration, the thunder of chariots, the original stadium remained the heart of the games. Because everything Olympian began with a single man running a single length of earth, barefoot and breathless, under the open sky. The Olympic Games were never just contests of speed or strength. They were ceremonies, unfolding in sacred space, under the watchful eyes of the gods. At their center stood Zeus, king of the Olympians, divine patron of the games. Before any athlete competed, before any discus flew, a great sacrifice was made at his altar. Dozens of oxen were led to slaughter, their flesh offered to God, their ashes piling upon centuries of devotion. This altar, built entirely of sacred ash, rose like a silent monument to generations of piety. Every athlete had to swear an oath in the temple of Zeus, hand resting on the flesh of a sacrifice boar, to train honestly, to compete fairly, to bring no shame upon the games. To cheat wasn't just dishonest, it was sacrilege. Those who broke their vows faced fines, beatings, or permanent banishment. Their names might even be carved onto bronze statues of Zeus placed at the stadium's entrance, a warning to all. Here are those who dishonored the gods. Presiding over it all were the Hellenodikai, judges chosen from Elis, not as referees, but as priestly guardians of both ritual and rule. They trained for 10 months, mastering not only athletic standards but sacred protocols. Cloaked in purple robes, staffs in hand, they moved with solemn authority through the sacred grove, and towering above it all was the temple of Zeus itself, one of the grandest in the Greek world. Inside stood a statue over 40 feet tall, crafted by the master sculptor Phidias. Zeus seated on a throne of cedar and ivory, draped in gold, holding a scepter in one hand and a statue of Nike, goddess of victory, in the other. His calm, eternal gaze watched over every race, every throw, every drop of sweat. So magnificent was this statue that it would later be named one of the 7 wonders of the ancient world. In Olympia, every movement of the body was an act of worship. Victory wasn't for glory alone, it was for Zeus. And yet, in this world of oil-slicked skin and divine competition, one presence was strikingly absent: women. The Olympic Games were an exclusively male domain, not just in competition but in attendance. Married women were strictly forbidden from even setting foot near the sanctuary during the Games. The penalty, according to some accounts, was death, being thrown from the cliffs of Mount Taipan. This wasn't mere custom. It reflected the deeply patriarchal fabric of Greek society, where public, sacred, and athletic life belonged to men. The Games celebrated the ideal male form, nude, disciplined, heroic, a living embodiment of cosmic order and civic virtue. Women, especially married women, had no place in the symbolic theater. But not all women were erased. Unmarried girls could occasionally attend, and they had their own festival, the Heraia, held in honor of Hera, wife of Zeus. In the very same stadium, young girls ran foot races, shorter than the men's, clothed in tunics that left one shoulder bare, their hair loose and flowing. Victors received olive wreaths in the honor of dedicating statues to Hera. Meaningful, yes, but never equal. The Heraia was a footnote to the main event. The Olympics remained a male ritual, tied to Zeus, military prowess, and civic identity. There was one remarkable exception. Caniska of Sparta, a noble woman and accomplished horse breeder. She entered chariot teams in the games. Since the crown went to the owner, not the driver, she became the first woman recorded as an Olympic champion. Yet even she never saw her victory with her own eyes. She was barred from the stadium, forced to celebrate from afar. Her triumph was real, but her presence was not permitted. The exclusion of women wasn't an oversight. It was law, tradition, theology, all woven together. In ancient Greece, an Olympic victory carried weight far beyond the arena. It was political capital. Every athlete carried the name of his polis like a banner. To win was to declare, through sweat and sinew, that your city was strong, virtuous, and favored by the gods. When a victor returned home, he was greeted like a conquering general. City gates opened for him. Poets composed odes in his honor. None more famous than Pindar, whose victory hymns wove athletic triumph into myth and eternity. Cities rewarded their champions with land, money, lifetime meals, tax exemptions, front-row seats at the theater, even public office. Some aristocrats invested heavily in the games, not to compete, but to own the means of victory. They funded training, bred horses, and sponsored athletes, knowing that Olympic glory could elevate their name for generations. Rivalries between city-states played out in the stadium as much as on the battlefield. When Athens faced Sparta in politics or war, they also watched each other's tally of victors. Who trained harder? Who pleased the gods more? Victory sent a clear message. Our way of life is superior. In this sense, the games were diplomacy in motion, a bloodless battlefield where honor was contested through excellence, not violence. The olive wreath may have been simple, but in the world of the Greeks, it carried the weight of legacy. For over 1,000 years, the games endured, unbroken, sacred, central to Greek identity. Every 4 years, without fail, people journeyed to Olympia. Athletes seeking glory, priests offering prayers, poets seeking inspiration. But in 393 CE, it ended. The Christian Roman Emperor Theodosius I, seeking to purge the empire of pagan practices, issued a decree abolishing the games. Temples were closed, altars dismantled. The great statue of Zeus was eventually lost to fire and time. The stadium fell silent. The trees grew over the track. The names of champions faded into dust. Yet the idea never died. In the 19th century, as archaeologists unearthed the ruins of Olympia, the temples, the baths, the starting lines, the dream stirred anew. Could the games return? Not as a relic, but as a living ideal? In 1896, they did. The modern Olympic Games were reborn in Athens, championed by Baron Pierre de Coubertin, who believed sport could unite nations in peace, just as it once united Greeks in reverence. He revived the 4-year cycle, the sacred flame, the parade of nations in the spirit of Eurity, excellence of body, mind, and character. The ancient games were gone, but their echo remains. In every torch lit, every athlete who steps onto the track, every moment when the world pauses to watch human beings strive, not for gold alone, but for something deeper, honor, unity, and the quiet hope that, for a few fleeting days, we might all be part of something greater than ourselves. Today, the Olympic flame is still kindled in Olympia, not with matches or modern tools, but with the sun itself. In the shadow of the ruined temple of Hera, a parabolic mirror captures the rays of Helios, just as fire might have been summoned in ancient times. From that sacred spark, the torch begins its journey, carried across continents, passed from hand to hand, connecting past and present in a single, unbroken thread of light. Though the modern games have grown global, commercial, and fiercely competitive, their heart still pulses with that ancient rhythm. A celebration not just of victory, but of human potential, of peace, of the quiet dignity in striving for something greater than oneself. From the sacred soil of Olympia to stadiums that hold tens of thousands under open skies, the Olympic spirit endures, not as a museum piece, but as a living tradition. The sacred fire was never truly extinguished. It was simply passed on. But now, let us turn from the games to another marvel born from resilience. The story of the statue that rose not from peace, but from war. The tale of the Colossus of Rhodes does not begin with bronze or artistry. It begins with siege. In 305 BCE, the island of Rhodes, a proud, independent naval power, found itself under attack by one of the most formidable warlords of the Hellenistic age, Demetrius Poliorcetes, the besieger, son of Antigonus and heir to Alexander's fractured empire. He arrived with an army tens of thousands strong, backed by warships, catapults, and a terrifying siege engine known as a Lepolis. The taker cities, a 9-story-tall mobile fortress on wheels, armored in iron and bristling with artillery. Rhodes, by contrast, was small, wealthy through trade, skilled in diplomacy, and fiercely independent. It had dared to ally with Egypt, the rival of Demetrius's dynasty. Punishment was expected to be swift. It was not. For nearly a year, the Rhodians held their ground. They used their knowledge of the terrain, the strength of their walls, and astonishing ingenuity. By night, they slipped beyond their fortifications to sabotage siege engines. They disrupted supply lines. They outmaneuvered and outthought their enemy at every turn. When the colossal Helepolis finally rumbled toward the city walls, they drenched in oil and set ablaze. The mighty tower burned, its iron plates glowing red before collapsing into ruin. Demetrius, humiliated, withdrew, leaving behind his shattered pride in a vast graveyard of war machines. Rhodes was saved. Its people, though weary and scarred, stood unbowed, and they decided the world should never forget. From the wreckage of the siege, the broken catapults, abandoned armor, and tons of discarded bronze and iron, the Rhodians resolved to build not more weapons, but a monument to honor their patron god Helios, the sun god, whom they believed had shielded them through the siege. They would erect a statue unlike any the world had seen, colossal in scale, defiant in spirit, radiant in meaning. They commissioned chairs of Lindos, a native Rhodian sculptor trained under Lysippus, the very artist who had shaped Alexander the Great's image. Chairs understood grandeur, proportion, and purpose. He promised not just a statue, but a symbol. Asterisk Rhodes stands tall. Rhodes stands free. Asterisk. Construction began around 292 BCE. For 12 years, artisans and laborers toiled under the Mediterranean sun, melting down the very weapons that had threatened their city and reforging them into the skin of a god. The Colossus would rise over 30 meters, nearly 100 feet, tall, built of bronze plates mounted over an internal skeleton of iron and stone. It was engineering as poetry, defiance as devotion, though later legends would claim the Colossus straddled the harbor entrance with ships sailing between its legs. Modern scholars agree this would have been structurally impossible. More likely, it stood beside the harbor, perhaps atop a stone pedestal, where its gleaming bronze form could be seen for miles out to sea. Helios probably stood upright, calm and majestic, one hand perhaps raised in blessing or holding a torch, his face serene, crowned with rays like a halo of sunlight. The statue was completed around 280 BCE. To sailors approaching Rhodes, it must have seemed like a vision. The sun glinting off bronze, the god's shadow stretching across the harbor walls, his presence both protective and proud. This was no mere decoration. It was identity cast in metal. The message was clear. Asterisk, we were besieged. We endured. We transformed our enemies' weapons into our glory. Asterisk. For 56 years, the Colossus stood, not just as a wonder, but as a beacon. Rhodes flourished as a cultural and commercial crossroads. The image of Helios appeared on Rhodian coins, traded from Egypt to Sicily, proclaiming the island's resilience and divine favor. The people no longer saw themselves merely as survivors. They saw themselves as chosen, elevated, destined. Then, in 226 BC, an earthquake struck. The statue cracked at the knees and toppled. Even in ruin, it inspired awe. The Rhodians were urged by an oracle not to rebuild it, and so the fallen giant lay where it fell for centuries, its bronze plate still gleaming in the sun, travelers marveling at its broken grandeur. Eventually, in the 7th century CE, the remnants were sold for scrap, reportedly requiring 900 camels to carry the pieces away. And so the physical colossus vanished, but its spirit never did. Like the Olympic flame, the colossus was more than metal. It was a testament to what a people can forge in the ashes of war. Not vengeance, but vision. Not fear, but radiance. It stood, if only for a time, as proof that even in the shadow of siege, a city can choose to build light instead of walls. Inscriptions celebrating the Colossus began to circulate across the Hellenistic world. Travelers wrote of how the rising sun would catch the statue's bronze skin at dawn, casting the harbor in a wash of golden light, as if Helios himself were blessing the city each morning. Rhodes, already known for its naval skill and trade, now flourished as a cultural beacon. Philosophers gathered in shaded courtyards. Sculptors opened workshops. Schools of rhetoric drew students from across the Mediterranean. The agora filled with statues, debates, and the hum of civic life. Art, politics, and faith wove together into a refined identity, with the Colossus at its radiant center. But its meaning reached far beyond the island shores. To sailors, merchants, and kings alike, the statue became a universal emblem of resilience. Here was a monument forged from the very weapons of war, dedicated not to conquest, but to light. It reminded the world that strength could be shaped from suffering, that peace, once won, could be transformed into beauty. For some, it symbolized divine harmony, the perfect alignment of a city and its god. For others, it stood as proof that even in an age of empires and armies, something could be built that inspired rather than destroyed. And for the Rhodians, it was simply theirs, their triumph, their protector, their sky-bound promise. The Colossus wasn't just one of the seven wonders. It was hope made visible, in bronze. Then, in 226 BCE, just over 50 years after its completion, the earth beneath Rhodes trembled without warning. A massive earthquake shook the island. Homes collapsed. Temples cracked open. The harbor walls swayed like reeds of storm. And then, with a sound set to echo like a god's sigh, the Colossus of Helios snapped at the knees and fell. It did not topple cleanly. It broke apart as it descended, legs crumbling first, the torso twisting, the arms shattering on impact. Fingers the size of a man splintered. The face that once gazed serenely over the sea now lay buried in dust. No one could stop it. No one could save it. The damage to the city was severe, but the deeper wound was spiritual. The Colossus had long ceased to be mere metal. It was a companion, a sign of divine favor, the skyline of Rhodian identity. To see it broken was to feel the city's soul laid bare. Yet even in ruin, it remained a marvel. For centuries, travelers came not to see a standing wonder, but a fallen one. The historian Strabo, writing 200 years later, described the scattered remains in awe. Bronze ribs curled like forgotten armor, limbs hollow yet colossal, fingers thicker than a man's torso. Inside, the iron framework revealed the genius of its builders, a civilization that had turned siege engines into sanctity. Some whispered the fall was divine punishment. Others saw it as nature's quiet lesson. Even glory must bow. But most Rhodians, though heartbroken, refused to erase the ruins. They left the pieces where they fell. And for nearly 800 years, those fragments lay in sacred silence, rusting, weathered, immense. The statue had once stood for invincibility. Now, in its brokenness, it spoke of something deeper. Impermanence, humility, the quiet dignity of things that endure even in ruin. After the quake, the question arose, should we rebuild it? Many longed to restore their guardian. But the Rhodians, ever devout, consulted the oracle of Delphi. Her reply chilled them. Asterisk, the fall was no accident. Helios is displeased. To rebuild is to risk his wrath. Asterisk, they took the warning seriously. There were practical concerns, too. Reconstruction would demand vast resources in a time of growing instability. So they chose reverence over ambition. Let it rest. And rest it did, not in oblivion, but in legend. The ruins became an open-air shrine. Pilgrims walked among the shattered limbs. Poets wrote odes to its ghost. Scholars marveled at the engineering hidden in the wreckage. Unlike other wonders destroyed by war or greed, the Colossus had been felled by the earth itself, an impartial reminder of human limits. And perhaps that's why it lingered so powerfully in memory. It wasn't perfect. It was real. For centuries, Rhodes remained a pilgrimage site, not despite the ruin, but because of it, alongside the lighthouse of Alexandria and the hanging gardens of Babylon. The fallen Colossus held its place among the seven wonders, but offered something the others could not just grandeur, but melancholy, not just scale, but soul. It taught that greatness can be remembered even when it breaks, that sometimes the fragments speak louder than the whole. Then, in 654 CE, Rhodes fell to the armies of the Umayyad Caliphate. The city was conquered, and with it, the last traces of the Colossus vanished. According to later Byzantine chroniclers, the invaders saw not a sacred relic, but raw material. The bronze was sold to a merchant from Syria, who loaded it onto the backs of, so the story goes, 900 camels and carried it away, piece by piece, into history. The statue was gone, but not forgotten, because the Colossus had already done what all true wonders must. It had outgrown its form. It lived on in stories, in coins, in the imagination of every traveler who stood on that harbor shore and felt the weight of what once was. It had become more than bronze. It had become myth. And myths, unlike statues, cannot be melted down. Whether the detail about 900 camels was poetic exaggeration or historical fact, the truth remained. The Colossus of Rhodes was gone. No more fragments lay in the dust for pilgrims to touch. No more colossal ribs or outstretched fingers caught the Mediterranean sun. The statue that had once stood tall over the harbor, silent witness to ships, storms, and centuries, now existed only in words. And yet, those words carried immense weight. Long after bronze vanished, writers continued to name the Colossus among the seven wonders of the ancient world, placing it beside pyramids that still pierced the sky, temples that still echoed with prayer, and tombs that still guarded their secrets. Though physically absent, it endured in the world's imagination, not as a ruin, but as a vision. Over time, that vision grew richer with each retelling. Medieval mapmakers drew it straddling the harbor entrance, ships sailing between its legs like humble travelers passing beneath the knees of a god. Renaissance artists reimagined it as a titan of mythic proportions, casting shadows across oceans. In poems and paintings, it became not just a statue, but a symbol of resilience, of rebirth, of what humanity dares to build when courage meets conviction. The irony is profound. We know almost nothing of what the Colossus truly looked like. No sketches, no models, no faithful carving survive. Everything we picture, the serene face, the sunray crown, the outstretched arm, comes from fragmented description, from the awestruck notes of travelers like Strabo, and from the dreams of those who came too late to see it. But perhaps that's precisely why it endures. Because the Colossus was never just a feat of engineering or a display of wealth. It was a dream forged in metal, a testament to what a people can create when they choose beauty over bitterness, when they transform the weapons of their enemies into a monument of peace. It began as defiance, but became something universal, a reminder that even the smallest city can shine if it refuses to be extinguished. More than 2,000 years after its fall, the Colossus still stands, not in bronze, but in meaning. It lives in the Statue of Liberty, whose torch echoes Helios's light, and whose placement in a great harbor honors the same ideal, that a towering figure can welcome the world and stand for hope, not power. It lives in every modern proposal to rebuild it, some envisioning solar panel limbs to honor the sun god sustainably, others imagining luminous structures of glass and light rising above the waves. None have been built, but the fact that we still dream of rebuilding it speaks volumes. The Colossus represents a kind of monument humanity longs to erect, not to conquerors or kings, but to possibility itself, to the belief that from the wreckage of war, something radiant can rise, that even when toppled by time or tragedy, the spirit of a people can remain unbroken. In every city rebuilt after destruction, in every memorial raised after loss, in every flame lit at the edge of the sea, the Colossus still stands, not in stone or bronze, but in story, in symbol, in the quiet space between who we are and what we dared become. Rhodes may be quiet now, but in the minds of those who remember, a god of bronze still watches the waves. And even broken, he shines. Of course, here is the next chapter in the unfolding mystery of the Colossus, crafted in a calm, immersive storytelling tone. spanning approximately 3,000 words. The story deepens, expands, and deliberately does not conclude, leaving room for wonder, danger, and discovery. The island welcomed Lena Macris not with fanfare, but with silence. It was early May, and the winds off the Aegean carried the scent of wild thyme and salt. Rhodes in spring was a place of soft light and long shadows, where ancient stones warmed slowly in the sun, and the sea whispered secrets to those who knew how to listen. Lena had grown up hearing those whispers. Her grandmother used to say the island remembered every footstep, every promise, every betrayal. Now, as she stood on the cracked marble of the Mandrake quay, staring at the sonar printout clutched in her hand, she understood what that meant. The anomaly beneath the harbor wasn't just metal. It was structured, circular, layered, and, most unnervingly, pulsing in rhythm with the sunrise. Every morning at 5:47 a.m., like clockwork, a low-frequency hum resonated through the water, detectable only by the most sensitive instruments. And the signal wasn't random. It matched a harmonic sequence found in two other places on Earth, the Great Pyramid's King's Chamber and a buried temple complex in Oman, once linked to the ancient sun cults of the Arabian Peninsula. Coincidence? Lena didn't believe in those. She checked into a small guest house near the old city walls, ironically named Helios Inn, and spent the first night reviewing the 1947 British file she'd smuggled out of the National Archives under guise of academic research. Project Helios, it turned out, hadn't been about archaeology at all. It was a Cold War-era initiative, disguised as historical inquiry, to investigate whether ancient civilizations had harnessed terrestrial resonance for energy or communication. The British had suspected Rhodes was more than a myth, especially after intercepting encrypted Soviet transmissions in the late 1940s referencing the fallen eye of the sun. And Eleanor Vane? She hadn't just disappeared. She'd gone underground, literally. Declassified MI6 memos hinted she'd been recruited, then vanished in 1948 during a field survey near the Rhodes Acropolis. The last entry in her journal, recovered from a sealed clay jar in 1951, read, "Asterisk, they think it's a weapon. It's not. It's a key. And it's waking." Asterisk. Lena closed the file, her pulse steady but her mind racing. She wasn't just chasing history. She was stepping into a game that had been playing for centuries. The next morning, she visited the Archaeological Museum of Rhodes, where fragments of Hellenistic bronze and temple inscriptions were displayed under glass. She asked to see the archives, specifically any records from the 1890s. The curator, a sharp-eyed woman named Irene, recognized Lena's name immediately. Macris. Irene said, not as a question but recognition. "Your great-grandmother was Despina." Lena blinked. "You knew her?" "I didn't," Irene replied, unlocking a heavy wooden cabinet. "But my grandfather did. He kept her letters." She handed Lena a brittle envelope, sealed with red wax stamped with a sun symbol. Inside were 3 pages in faded ink. Despina's own account Eleanor's final days on the island. She said the earth sings, Despina had written, asterisk, not in words, but in light, and the Colossus was its voice. But the voice was stolen, not destroyed. Buried, not lost. She believed the Umayyads didn't take the bronze to sell. It was too heavy, too sacred. They moved it to protect it, to hide the heart. Asterisk. Lena's breath caught. The heart. That night, she hiked to the Acropolis under a waxing moon. The ruins of the Temple of Apollo loomed like ghostly sentinels. Using Eleanor's old notes, reconstructed from academic citations and family lore, she located the overgrown path to the 3 springs. The stone disk was still there, half hidden by ivy. She cleared the vegetation, revealing the concentric rings and the inscription, asterisk, the eye of the sun sees what the heart conceals. Asterisk. She placed her palm flat against the stone. Nothing happened. Not at first. Then, deep beneath her feet, a vibration, a single, resonant tone that lasted less than a second. Her smartwatch, still on her wrist, flickered. The screen glitched, then displayed a string of numbers. 28.06.2025, 05:47. The summer solstice. The exact time of the daily pulse. It wasn't a coincidence. It was an invitation. Over the next week, Lena worked in secret, using university credentials and a cover story about coastal erosion studies to gain access to sonar drones and ground-penetrating radar. She mapped the area around the Three Springs and discovered something astonishing. The underground chamber Eleanor had found wasn't isolated. It connected to a network of tunnels, some dating to the Bronze Age, that converged beneath the Mandrake Harbor. But the real breakthrough came when she analyzed the electromagnetic pulses in conjunction with tidal data. The anomaly wasn't just emitting energy, it was harvesting it. The structure absorbed solar radiation during the day, stored it in crystalline matrices, likely quartz-laced concrete, and released it in controlled bursts at dawn. The effect was subtle, a localized warming of the water, a slight ionization of the air, and that elusive golden shimmer fishermen still reported. This wasn't magic. It was advanced ancient engineering, perhaps inspired by Egyptian or Mesopotamian knowledge, refined by Rhodian ingenuity, and sanctified as divine. But why build it? Lena found a clue in a newly translated Coptic fragment from a Nag Hammadi style codex discovered in a Cairo bazaar in 2019. It spoke of the seven lambs of the world, sacred sites aligned with celestial events, each housing a solar heart that maintained the planet's energetic balance. Rhodes was named as the Western lamp. According to the text, if all seven were awakened in harmony, they could reweave the veil between worlds. If one was damaged or silenced, the others grew unstable. The Colossus hadn't just been a monument, it had been a regulator, and it had been offline for nearly 2,300 years. Lena's research didn't go unnoticed. On the 10th day, a sleek black yacht appeared in the harbor, flying no flag. Men in dark suits came ashore, polite but insistent, asking questions about unauthorized surveys. The local police chief, an old friend of Lena's family, warned her gently, "Some doors are better left closed, Corizzi." That night, someone broke into her room at the Helios Inn. Nothing was stolen, but her laptop had been accessed. The sonar data was copied. Worse, her encrypted notes on the solstice alignment had been read. She knew then she wasn't the only one searching. 2 days later, a man approached her at a cafe near the palace of the Grand Master. He was in his late 50s, with silver hair and calm eyes that held the weight of long travel. "My name is Elias," he said simply. "I knew your grandmother." Lena froze. "Elias Roussos?" He smiled faintly. The name was a cover. "My real name is Yusuf Al-Khalili. My family served the Umayyad governors of Rhodes in the 7th century. We were entrusted with a secret, not to destroy the Colossus, but to relocate its core." He leaned forward. "The 900 camels? A myth to mislead. The bronze limbs were sold, yes, but the heart, a sphere of solid quartz wrapped in gold leaf, inscribed with harmonic runes, was taken inland, hidden in a mountain shrine, guarded by my ancestors for generations." Lena stared at him. "And now, Yusuf said, his voice low, "it's waking. And others want it, not to protect it, to control it." He slid a small object across the table, a bronze disc no larger than a coin, etched with the same concentric rings. "This is a key. It resonates with the heart. On the solstice, at dawn, if placed in the right location, it will open the way." "But why tell me?" Lena asked. "Because your bloodline has been part of this longer than mine," he replied. "Despina knew. Eleanor guessed. But you have the tools to understand what it truly is." The days leading to the solstice were a blur of preparation and paranoia. Lena and Yusuf worked in silence, moving between the Acropolis, the Three Springs, and the harbor, testing alignments, calibrating frequencies, and mapping the final path. They discovered that the right location wasn't in the harbor at all, but on the eastern tip of the island, at a place called Prasnisi, where the Aegean and Mediterranean seas meet. According to ancient Rhodian star charts, this was where Helios first stepped onto the earth each morning. The bronze disk, when held at sunrise on certain days, vibrated faintly, pointing like a compass toward Prasnisi. But as the solstice neared, so did the others. Men in unmarked vehicles began appearing near their survey sites. Drones hovered over the Acropolis at night. One evening, Lena found a dead raven on her doorstep. Its neck snapped, a tiny bronze ring threaded through its beak. An old Ottoman warning. You are being watched. Yusuf grew more withdrawn. They're not just after the heart, he confessed one night. They believe it can be used to manipulate resonance, to destabilize fault lines, amplify storms, even influence human consciousness. A weapon disguised as a relic. But it's not, Lena insisted. No, he agreed. It's a lens. It doesn't create power. It focuses what's already there, the sun, the sea, the earth's own song. But in the wrong hands, even light can burn. On the morning of June 28th, 2025, they made their move. The world held its breath. The sky was cloudless. The sea calm. Lena and Yusuf drove to Prazanisi in silence, the bronze disc wrapped in cloth in Lena's satchel. The sight was desolate, just wind, rock, and the endless meeting of two seas. At the highest point of the promontory, they found what they'd been seeking, a flat stone altar half buried in sand, carved with solar symbols and a depression in the center, the exact size of a disc. As the first light touched the horizon, Lena placed the disc into the hollow. For a moment, nothing happened. Then the ground beneath them hummed, a deep, resonant tone that rose through their bones. The air shimmered. The sea below began to glow with that familiar golden hue, spreading outward in perfect concentric rings. From the harbor, 40 kilometers away, the buried anomaly responded. A pulse of energy surged through the underground tunnels, converging at Prazanisi. The sky above seemed to brighten unnaturally, as if an invisible lens had focused the sun's rays onto this one spot. Yusuf fell to his knees, tears in his eyes. It's remembering. But the moment was shattered by the roar of engines. 2 helicopters descended from the north, black and unmarked. Armed figures rappelled down. They've triangulated the resonance, Lena whispered. Yusuf grabbed her arm. The heart isn't here. This is just the antenna. The real chamber is beneath the sea, accessible only when the harmonic field is active. You must go. Now. Chamber is beneath the sea, accessible only when the harmonic field is active. You must go. Now. From his coat, he pulled a small diving compass and a waterproof satchel. The entrance is 200 meters offshore near the old lighthouse reef. The current will guide you, but you have only minutes before the field collapses. What about you? She asked. I'll hold them off, he said, already moving toward the ridge, pulling a signal flare from his pocket. Go, Lena. Don't let them turn light into shadow. She didn't hesitate. Lena sprinted down the slope, plunged into the cold water, and swam with the current pulling her eastward. Behind her, the flare exploded in red fire. Shouts echoed over the waves. The sea grew warmer as she approached the reef, and then she saw it, a circular opening in the seabed, glowing faintly from within. She took a deep breath and dove. Inside, the water was still. The walls were smooth, lined with the same quartz concrete as the chamber on land. She followed the tunnel down, until she entered a vast dome cavern. And there, resting on a pedestal of black basalt at the center, suspended in a column of liquid light, was the heart of Helios. It was smaller than she'd imagined, no larger than a human heart, but it pulsed with inner fire. Golden light rippled through the water, and the hum filled her skull like a choir of stars. She reached out, but as her fingers neared the sphere, the cavern trembled. Alarms, mechanical, modern, sounded from above. They'd found the entrance. And then from the shadows of the chamber, a voice spoke, calm, accented, chillingly familiar. Hello, Dr. Macris. I've been waiting for someone worthy to arrive. Lena turned. Standing in the arched doorway, flanked by 2 armed operatives, was a man in a tailored suit, his silver hair catching the golden glow. It was Kamil Effendi's descendant, or so he claimed. I've studied your family's work for decades, he said, stepping forward. Eleanor was close. Yusuf is loyal, but you understand the science and the soul. That's why I let you lead me here. He gestured to the heart. This doesn't belong buried. It belongs in the world, under my stewardship. Lena's heart pounded, but she didn't step back. You think you can control it? I don't need to control it, he said softly. I just need to amplify it. One pulse, directed at the right fault line, and I can reshape borders. Silence enemies. Bring nations to their knees begging for stability, and I will be the one who provides it. He smiled, not as a conqueror, as a savior. Behind him, the water rippled. A shadow moved in the tunnel. Lena didn't know if it was Yusuf, the sea itself, or something older, but she knew one thing. The heart wasn't a weapon, and it wasn't a tool. It was a witness, and it had been waiting, not for a master, but for a guardian. She took a breath, her hand still outstretched. The light in the chamber brightened. The hum deepened, and somewhere far above, the sun rose fully over Rhodes, casting its first golden ray not on stone, but on a choice yet to be made. The story isn't over. It's just reaching its threshold. Of course, here's the next immersive chapter in the unfolding mystery of the Colossus, crafted in a calm, atmospheric storytelling tone, approximately 3,000 words in length and deliberately open-ended, deepening the legend without closing it. The water in the cavern held its breath. Lena stood motionless, her fingers inches from the heart of Helios. The sphere pulsed gently, not with heat, but with something closer to thought, a slow, rhythmic thrum that resonated in her bones, in the spaces between her ribs, in the quiet places inside her mind where instinct lived. It wasn't speaking in words. It was remembering through her. And in that memory, she saw flashes, not visions, but echoes. A bronze giant standing at dawn, sunlight fracturing through hidden lenses in its chest. Priests chanting in a language older than Greek, their voices tuned to the same frequency as the earth's hum. A network of stone conduits stretching across the Mediterranean, linking roads to Delphi, to Alexandria, to a place deep in the Atlas Mountains. And a warning, not carved in stone, but encoded in harmonic resonance. Asterisk: if one heart falls, the others sleep. If one heart is weaponized, all will burn. Asterisk. The man in the suit, Camel's descendant, though she doubted even that name was real, stepped closer. "You understand now, don't you?" he said softly. "This isn't superstition. It's physics, geometry, light made conscious. And I have the resources to give it purpose." "Purpose?" Lena echoed, her voice steady despite the cold water lapping at her waist. "You mean control." He smiled faintly. "Control is just responsibility with teeth." Behind him, one of his operatives shifted, hand tightening on his rifle. The other scanned the chamber with a handheld device, a harmonic dampener. Lena realized he was trying to neutralize the resonance. But the heart wasn't reacting to them. It was reacting to her. She took a slow breath and closed the distance between her palm and the sphere. The moment her skin touched it, the entire cavern ignited, not with fire, but with light. Golden radiance flooded the water, refracting off the quartz-lined walls, turning the sea into liquid amber. The hum swelled into a chord so pure it vibrated in her teeth. And then silence. Absolute weightless silence. For a heartbeat, the world outside ceased to exist. There was only the heart and the memory it carried. She saw the truth now. The Colossus had never been the wonder. It had been the antenna. The heart, the quartz sphere inscribed with harmonic runes, was the true artifact. Crafted not by chairs, but by a lineage of astronomer priests who traced their knowledge back to the builders of Göbekli Tepe. It was designed not to project power, but to receive it, to tune the island to the sun's daily cycle, to stabilize the local geomagnetic field, and to broadcast a calming resonance across the region. "You felt it too, didn't you?" Lena asked, her voice hoarse. Amira nodded. "In Cairo, 3 nights ago, the Sphinx enclosure, it hummed at dawn, just for a moment, and my instruments recorded a spike in Schumann resonance, global, not local." She looked at the bundle in Lena's arms. "You found it." "I found one of them," Lena corrected. "There are 6 others." Amira's eyes widened. "The 7 lamps." "You've heard the term?" In a temple text near Siwa Oasis, Amira whispered. It said, "When the first eye opens, the others will weep light." I thought it was poetic. "It's a warning," Lena said, "and an invitation." She unwrapped the heart. In the dim chapel light, it glowed softly, casting golden reflections on the old frescoes of saints and angels, images that now seemed like distant echoes of older gods. "What do we do?" Amira asked. "We don't hide it," Lena said firmly. "We find the others, before Camel does, before governments weaponize them, before the resonance destabilizes from partial awakening." "But how?" "We're just two scholars." "No," Lena said, a new resolve settling in her chest. "We're the first witnesses, and witnesses have a duty." She reached into her pocket and pulled out a small, waterproof camera. She recorded everything. The chamber, the heart, the map in the grotto. "I'm sending this to 5 people," she said. "1 in Peru, 1 in Mongolia, 1 in Jordan, 1 in Norway, studying North Sun cults, and 1 in Antarctica, working on ice core resonance anomalies." The network, Amira breathed. "Not a secret society," Lena said. "A response team. Scientists, linguists, historians, people who've seen the signs but didn't know they were connected." Amira smiled faintly. Eleanor Vane would be proud. Lena looked out the chapel window, toward the darkening sea. "She started this. We finish it." That night, as the first stars appeared, Lena uploaded the data from a satellite phone on a remote ridge. The file was encrypted, labeled only Project Helios, Phase 2, Awakening. Within hours, replies began trickling in. From Peru. Asterisk, the stone circles at Moray have been resonating at dawn. We thought it was seismic. It's not. Asterisk, from Mongolia. Asterisk, the deer stones are warm to the touch. Always at sunrise. Asterisk, from Jordan. Asterisk, Petra's Al-Khazna chamber hums when no one's inside. We have recordings. Asterisk, and from Antarctica. Asterisk, there's something under the ice. Not a base, a structure, and it's singing. Asterisk, the network was real, and it was already awake. But Camel hadn't given up. In a high-rise office in Geneva, he watched Lena's encrypted transmission bounce through servers, then vanish into a mesh of academic institutions and private labs. He couldn't trace it all, but he didn't need to. He knew where the next pulse would lead. He turned to his aide. "Prepare the team for Luxor, and contact our asset in Cusco. The race has begun." He walked to the window, overlooking the Alps. In his pocket, a small device pulsed gently, a replica of the heart's frequency, reverse-engineered from intercepted data. He didn't need to possess the artifacts. He just needed to mimic their song. And with enough power, a mimic could become a master. Back on Rhodes, Lena stood on the cliffs as dawn approached. The heart rested in a lead line case lined with quartz wool. Useless design to mute but not silence its resonance. She'd seen no sign of him since the cavern. But last night, a fisherman had found a bronze staff washed ashore near Mandrake, wrapped in cloth with a single word in Arabic, asterisk guard. Asterisk, she believed he was still out there, watching, waiting. As the first light touched the sea, the heart hummed softly in its case. And far away, in the deserts of Egypt, another hum answered. Lena closed her eyes and listened. The world was waking up. And this time it wouldn't be silenced. The story isn't over. It's just beginning to sing. Of course. Here is the next chapter in the unfolding mystery of the Colossus. A continuation that deepens a legend, introduces new layers of ancient knowledge, and expands the global resonance of the 7 lamps. Written in a calm, immersive storytelling tone, approximately 3,000 words, and deliberately open-ended. The desert does not keep secrets. It reveals them, slowly, mercilessly, only to those who learn to listen. 3 weeks after the awakening in Rhodes, Lena Macris stood at the edge of the Valley of the Kings, the morning sun already hot on her shoulders. The air shimmered with dry heat, and the silence was so complete it felt like a presence. Yet beneath that silence, as she closed her eyes and held the quartz tuning fork Yusuf had given her, she could hear it, a low, steady hum rising from the bedrock of Luxor. The heart of Rhodes, now secured in a shielded case buried beneath the chapel floor on Rhodes, had not stopped resonating. Instead, Its pulse had grown quieter, more focused, like a whisper sent across a vast distance. And something in Egypt was whispering back. She hadn't come alone. Amira walked beside her, her dark eyes scanning the cliffs, her fingers tracing the air as if reading invisible currents. "It's stronger here than in Cairo," she murmured. "Not just resonance, intention. This isn't a natural echo. The ancients built this response. They'd spent days studying the alignment of temples, the acoustics of burial chambers, the placement of obelisks like tuning rods planted in the earth. At Karnak, they recorded a faint harmonic bloom at dawn, centered on the hypostyle hall. At the temple Hatshepsut, the stone reliefs of sun barges seemed to glow from within for exactly 47 seconds at sunrise. But the true source, they suspected, lay underground, not in Pharaoh's tomb, but in something older. That night, under a sky dense with stars, Amira led Lena to a sight few tourists ever saw, a collapsed shaft near Deir el-Bahari, long dismissed as a failed excavation. Local Nubian elders called it the mouth of Ra, not a place of death, but of rebirth. The Greeks thought Helios drove the sun across the sky. Amira said, brushing sand from a carved stone lintel. But the Egyptians believed Ra was the sun, and that his heart beat in the stone. She pressed the tuning fork against the rock. A vibration answered, not from the fork, but from deep below. They returned at dawn, with permission from a sympathetic antiquities official and a discreet donation to the local community. They cleared the entrance just enough to fit through. Inside, a narrow passage sloped downward, its walls covered in faded pigment. Not scenes of judgment or gods, but geometric patterns, spirals, lattices, concentric circles that mirror the ones in roads. "This isn't funerary art," Lena whispered. "It's a circuit." Amira nodded. "A resonance map." At the end of the passage, they found a circular chamber, 28 meters in diameter, the same as the anomaly in Mandrake Harbor. The ceiling was carved to mimic the night sky of 2500 BCE. At the center stood a pedestal, empty now, but its surface bore familiar indentation, the shape of a sphere. And around it, 7 channels radiated outward, each ending in a bowl of black basalt. They didn't just store the heart here, Amira realized. They fed it. The bowls, probably filled with water, oil, or quartz dust, acted as harmonic amplifiers. The entire chamber was a tuning instrument. Lena placed a tuning fork in the central hollow. Instantly, the walls lit with a soft, golden glow, not from light, but from the stone itself, infused with phosphorescent minerals that activated under specific frequencies. The air filled with the same chords she'd heard in the Rhodian cavern, pure, ancient, alive. But this time it didn't stop. The resonance surged upward, through the bedrock, into the temples above. In the distance, the great obelisk of Hatshepsut began to hum, a deep, sonorous tone that rolled across the valley like a voice returning from sleep. "They knew," Lena breathed. "They built the whole landscape as a receiver." Amira's eyes shone. The heart of Ra isn't gone. It's dormant, and it's waiting for its counterpart in Rhodes to call it home. But before they could record more, Amira's satellite phone buzzed. A message from their contact in Peru. Asterisk, Moray is active. The terraces are glowing at midnight. Come quickly, and bring the fork. Asterisk, the Andes rose like the spine of the world. Lena and Amira arrived in Cusco to find Dr. Mateo Quispe waiting at the airport, his face grim. A Quechua archaeologist with ties to local Pacos, spiritual elders, he'd been monitoring the circular terraces of Moray for years. The site, long thought to be an Incan agricultural laboratory, had begun exhibiting impossible behavior. "The stone's warm at night," he told them as they drove through the sacred valley. "Not from geothermal activity. From within. And the elders say the apis, the mountain spirits, are singing." At Moray, the truth was undeniable. Under the full moon, the concentric terraces glowed with a soft, silver-blue light, not reflected, emitted. The temperature in the central pit was 10 degrees warmer than the surrounding air. And when Lena held the tuning fork near the lowest stone, the entire complex resonated, a harmonic cascade that echoed off the surrounding peaks. The Incas didn't build this for crops, Matteo said, his voice hushed. They built it to listen. He led them to a hidden chamber beneath the lowest terrace, accessible only through a narrow crawl space known to the elders. Inside, they found a second pedestal, this one carved from meteoric iron, etched with symbols that blended Incan cosmology with something far older. And in the center, resting on a bed of crushed lapis lazuli, was a sphere. Not quartz, not bronze, but obsidian, smooth, black, and impossibly cold to the touch. Yet, when Lena placed a tuning fork beside it, the obsidian sang, vibrating at a frequency that made the air shimmer. The heart of Alapa, Matteo whispered, the Incan god of thunder and rain. But the elders call it Taikawasi, the flower house, because it doesn't control storms. It harmonizes them. This heart was different. Where roads pulsed with light, this one thrummed with weather, with atmospheric charge, with the breath of the mountains. It didn't broadcast. It balanced. But as Lena reached to examine it, Matteo stopped her. The elders say only the chosen may touch it, and it chooses by silence, not sound. He stepped back. If you meant to take it, it will let you. Lena hesitated, then slowly extended her hand. The obsidian didn't resist. It leaned into her touch, its surface warming instantly. A vision flooded her mind, not of storms, but of rivers, ancient waterways flowing beneath the Andes, connecting Moray to Lake Titicaca, to the Amazon, to a hidden spring deep in the jungle where another heart slept. The network wasn't just global. It was hydrological, atmospheric, geomagnetic, and it was all connected. But their moment was interrupted by the distant roar of engines. Helicopters. Camel. Amira hissed. Matteo's face darkened. They followed the resonance. Then we don't have much time, Lena said, carefully wrapping the obsidian heart in a cloth woven with silver threads. Another gift from Yusuf, designed to mute but not silence its frequency. As they fled into the high trails, the helicopters circled like vultures. But the mountains were on their side. The mist rolled in, thick and sudden, swallowing the terraces whole. The Apis had spoken. Back in a safe house in Cusco, they analyzed the data. The obsidian heart pulsed in sync with atmospheric pressure shifts, especially over the Amazon basin. And when placed near the tuning fork, it projected a faint holographic map onto the wall, a web of light connecting Moray to 6 other points, including one deep in Brazilian rainforest near the Xingu River. The Portuguese explorers called the City of Z, Amira said, eyes wide. Fawcett wasn't chasing myth. He was following resonance. But their discovery came with a cost. News reports confirmed Camel's presence in Egypt. Satellite imagery showed unauthorized drilling near the Valley of the Kings. And in Jordan, their contact hadn't responded in 48 hours. They're moving faster than we thought, Lena said. Amira nodded. We can't protect all the sites alone. That night, Lena made a decision. She opened a secure channel and sent a message to the network. The 5 scholars, the linguists in Mongolia, the glaciologist in Antarctica, the acoustics expert in Norway. Asterisk, they're weaponizing the search. We need to activate the full protocol, not just observe. Awaken. Asterisk, the reply came within minutes. From Mongolia. Asterisk, the deer stones are aligned with Pleiades. At summer solstice, they'll open a path. Asterisk, from Jordan. Asterisk, Petra's response is ready. But the heart is hidden in a tomb sealed by sound. Only the right frequency can unlock it. Asterisk, from Antarctica. Asterisk, the ice is singing, and it's getting louder. Asterisk, and from a new sender, one they hadn't contacted, came a single line. Asterisk, I've been waiting for you to call. Meet me in Petra. E.V. Asterisk, Lena's breath caught. Eleanor Vane had died in 1952, but her journal had ended with, asterisk, if the light returns, I will be there. Asterisk, was it a descendant, a forgery, or something else entirely? She didn't know, but she knew they had to go. Petra greeted them with rose-red silence. The ancient Nabatean city carved into the cliffs felt both majestic and watchful, as if the stone faces carved into the rock were still guarding secrets. Their contact, Dr. Samira Nasser, met them at the entrance to Al-Khazna, the treasury, her face pale but resolute. "They took my team," she said quietly. "Camille's men. They're searching the tombs with sonic drills, trying to force the resonance. But sound-based locks can't be forced," Amira said. "They have to be sung." Samira led them through hidden passages known only to local Bedouin families. At the heart of the city, in a chamber beneath the monastery, they found it, a door made not of stone but of layered crystal, etched with solar and lunar cycles. "The heart of Dushra," Samira whispered, "the Nabatean sky god, hidden here when Rome came." The door required a harmonic sequence, a melody of frequencies that matched the solstices and equinoxes of Petra's latitude. Lena and Amira worked through the night, using the tuning fork and data from Rhodes to reconstruct the sequence. As dawn broke, they played the final note. The crystal door dissolved into mist. Inside, the chamber was empty, except for a single object on a pedestal, a sphere of translucent alabaster, veined with gold, pulsing with the soft rhythm of desert winds. But beside it lay something unexpected, a leather-bound journal. Lena opened it with trembling hands. The handwriting was faded but unmistakable. Eleanor Vane, 1948. The final entry read, "Asterisk, if you're reading this, the network is awake. I never died. I went deeper. The hearts choose their guardians. And I was chosen by the one in Antarctica. Meet me at the ice. The final lamp is the key to the whole. But beware, Camel's bloodline isn't just after power. They believe the hearts can be used to restart the Earth's magnetic field or collapse it. The choice is yours." Asterisk. Before Lena could process the words, a voice echoed from the passage. "You always were sentimental, Dr. Macris." Camel stood in the doorway, flanked by armed operatives. But this time he wasn't alone. Beside him stood a woman in a white lab coat, Dr. Elise Chun, the glaciologist from Antarctica. Lena's blood ran cold. "You." Elise avoided her eyes. "They showed me what's under the ice, Lena. It's not just a heart. It's a core. And if we don't control it, the geomagnetic reversal will tear the planet apart." Camel stepped forward. "We're not villains. We're stabilizers. And now, thanks to you, we have the map." He gestured to the alabaster heart. "Take it." But as his man reached for it, the ground trembled. Not an earthquake, a harmonic backlash. The chamber's walls began to glow, the frequencies clashing. The alabaster heart pulsed wildly, its light turning red. "You fool," Samira cried. "You're forcing it out of phase." The air crackled, stone cracked, and from deep within the earth, a sound rose, not a hum, but a warning. Camel's face paled. "Shut it down." But it was too late. The resonance had been disrupted, and somewhere, far away, in the ice of Antarctica, the final heart began to scream. Lena ran, not from fear, from duty. She grabbed the alabaster heart, its surface burning cold, and fled into the labyrinth of Petra. Behind her, the chamber collapsed in a storm of dissonant frequencies. She didn't know if Elise had betrayed them or been coerced. She didn't know if Eleanor was alive or if her journal was a lure. All she knew was this: the network was destabilizing. 1 heart awakened was a miracle. 2 was a message. 3, out of harmony, was a catastrophe. And Antarctica was the anchor. As she reached the edge of the city, a figure emerged from the shadows. "Yusuf." He said nothing, just held out a hand. And it was a small, silver compass, not for direction, but for resonance. Its needle pointed south, not to the Mediterranean, not to the Andes, but to the pole. "The ice is calling," he said simply. Lena looked at the hearts in her satchel, bronze, obsidian, alabaster, each singing a different song. And far to the south, beneath 2 miles of ice, the final note waited. The story isn't over. The song is just reaching its crescendo.